Let's go to Daniel chapter 7, and let's start reading there with verse 1. Daniel chapter 7, verse 1. He says, this is now 48 years after Nebuchadnezzar's dream. He says, in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and visions in his mind as he lay on his bed. Then he wrote the dream down and related the following summary of it. Daniel said, I was looking in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. Now, in Bible prophecy, the term sea is always used as a symbol of the Gentile nations, whereas the term land is always used as a symbol of the nation of Israel, the land of Israel. So Daniel sees a vision, and the vision has to do with the stirring up of the Gentile nations. And what he sees is not a statue, but he sees four great beasts coming up out of the sea, out of the Gentile nations, each one different from the other. The first was like a lion and had the wings of an eagle. He says, I kept looking until its wings were plucked, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. A human mind was also given to it. This is obviously Babylon. The lion was the symbol of Babylon, and he speaks about how the leader of this nation is lifted up from the ground and made to stand like a man. As you know, Nebuchadnezzar was struck with insanity and went around for years like an animal on the ground, and then suddenly regained his sanity and stood up like a man, and a human mind was given back to him. And then it says in verse 5, and behold another beast, a second one, resembling a bear, and it was raised up on one side, one of its sides higher than the other, and 3 ribs were in its mouth between its teeth, and thus they said, arise and devour much meat. So now this is the kingdom that will overthrow Babylon. This is the bear that will overthrow the lion, and this is the Medo-Persian Empire, which was 2 nations together, the Medes and the Persians, and at first the Medes dominated the union, later the Persians came to dominate. So one side was raised up higher than the other. Then in verse 6 he sees the third kingdom. I kept looking, and behold another one like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. Man, a leopard is one of the fastest animals on earth, and it's even faster now because it has 4 wings of a bird. This is a very rapid animal. And the beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. And this, of course, is the nation or the empire of the Greeks. After all, Alexander the Great conquered the world in 3.5 years. And so it's represented as a kingdom that moves rapidly. Then in verse 7, he comes to the fourth kingdom. After this, I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful, terrifying, extremely strong, had iron teeth. He doesn't describe this beast as a particular type of animal. It's just a beast with iron teeth. And remember, this is corresponding now with that statue of Nebuchadnezzar that had the iron legs. So this would be the Roman Empire. It says it devoured and crushed and trampled down the remainder with its feet. And it was different from all the beasts that were broken before it. And it had 10 horns. And he says, and while I was contemplating the horns, behold, another horn, a little one, came up among them, and 3 of the first horns were pulled out by the roots before it, and behold, this horn possessed eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth uttering great boasts. Now let's just stop here for a moment and make some observations about this particular passage. Daniel sees the parade of Gentile empires, just as Nebuchadnezzar did. He sees the same succession, Babylon, followed by Medo-Persia, followed by Greece, followed by Roman, followed by a European confederation, followed by the empire of the Antichrist. But he sees them as a series of ravenous beasts devouring one another. Quite a contrast to Nebuchadnezzar's view of this great and glorious and splendid statue. You see, Nebuchadnezzar's view is the view of these kingdoms from man's viewpoint, where man looks upon the kingdoms of this world as something great and mighty and awesome, and even worships them. But Daniel sees these very same kingdoms from God's viewpoint as just a bunch of ravenous, wild animals. The second observation is the fact that the last empire of 10 horns grows out of the head of the fourth beast with iron teeth. And I think this is a clear indication that the final Gentile empire will begin as a revival of the old Roman Empire. In verse 9, we have introduced for the first time a demonic individual whom the Bible refers to in the New Testament as the Antichrist, the one who will rule over the last Gentile world empire. And Daniel amplifies this in verse 24. So turn to Daniel 7 and look there at verse 24, and you will see him amplifying what he has to say about this last empire, the empire of the Antichrist. He says, "As for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom 10 kings will arise, and another will arise after them. And he will be different from the previous ones, and he will subdue 3 kings. And he will speak out," this is the Antichrist now, "he will speak out against the Most High, and wear down the saints of the Highest One. And he will intend to make alteration in times and in law, and there will be given to him into his hand for times and a half time." That's 3.5 years. "But the court will sit for judgment, and his dominion will be taken away, annihilated, and destroyed forever." Now, these verses bring us to the second major theme in the end-time prophecies of Daniel, the tribulation of the Antichrist. Daniel could be called, in fact, the prophet of the Antichrist because he supplies us with more information about the Antichrist than any other prophet, including John, in the book of Revelation. In this passage we just read, in Daniel 7, beginning with verse 9, Daniel refers to this nefarious person as the little horn. He is described as a prideful man, full of boasting. In verse 25, he is described as a blasphemer and as a persecutor of the Jews. He is described as one who will change the law and the times. And of course he will do that because Western law is based upon the Bible, and its time is based upon Jesus Christ and his birth. We are told that he will persecute the Jews for 3.5 years, and then suddenly his empire will be destroyed.
As I looked, thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was as white as snow. The hair of his head was white like wool. His throne was flaming with fire, and its wheels were all ablaze. A river of fire was flowing, coming out from before him. Thousands upon thousands attended him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were opened. Then I continued to watch because of the boastful words the horn was speaking. I kept looking until the beast was slain and its body destroyed and thrown into the blazing fire. The other beasts had been stripped of their authority, but were allowed to live for a period of time. In my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed.
Then the sovereignty, power, and greatness of all the kingdoms under heaven will be handed over to the holy people of the Most High. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all rulers will worship and obey him.
This is the end of the matter.